Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Veterans Technical Assistance Center webinar series. Today, our webinar is part of our Special Population series, and today's webinar is specifically on connecting veterans with disabilities to employment. We are fortunate enough to have three incredible guest speakers today who have lots of expertise to share with you. Before I get into that, I just have a couple of quick logistical things to mention to everyone. You may have noticed that your phone lines are muted. You will not be able to directly ask questions through the phone or through your microphone during the webinar. You will be able to ask them through the online question box that is part of the GoToWebinar toolbar that's located on the side of your screen. Feel free to click that box and type a question at any time that you think about it, that it comes to your head. We will be saving time at the end of the webinar to get to as many questions as possible. If there are any questions for some reason that we can't get to in the time we have allotted, we will forward those to the speaker who has the expertise to answer that question and make sure that you get an answer to those as well. The webinar is being recorded today, and so it will be available for you to listen to or watch again in the future. We will also be asking you to take a quick survey at the end of the webinar. It will pop up in the webinar, but you'll also receive an email tomorrow, about 24 hours from now, just asking you again to take the survey if you haven't already done so. And that email will also include a link to the recording of the webinar, so you'll be able to see it again in its entirety if you wish to do so. We are also going to be working on getting this webinar closed captioned as well. The turnaround for that is a few days, so the original link to the recording will not be closed captioned, but there will be a captioned version available probably sometime at the end of, within the next week or so. So with that, we're going to get ready to get started. Enough talk about me. I really want to get to our presenters today. We're really thrilled to have a group of three presenters. We have two folks from the Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP, of the U.S. Department of Labor. And then we also have an expert in IPS from the IPS Supported Employment Center. First, though, we will be hearing from our ODEP partners. So I'm really thrilled to introduce Dr. Christopher Button. She's the supervisor of the Workforce Systems Policy team at ODEP, and Rose Sloan, who's a policy advisor at the Workforce Systems Policy team. So Chris and Rose, I'm going to hand things to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cindy. So you can move us forward, past that next slide, and we will get started. Let me say, first of all, that we are really honored to be here today. Cindy, we express our appreciation to you and our colleagues at the DOL Vets Office. We think what you're doing around the HVRP grants is really important, and we're excited to be able to participate through this webinar. So today, in our brief time, we want to give you a very brief, just kind of an introduction to the Office of Disability Employment Policy, tell you about our customized employment initiatives, plural, talk a little bit about discovery as really the essential piece to achieving a customized outcome, and then share with you something that we've been doing through our Employment First activities here at ODEP, and a really amazing web portal that you can find all kinds of information about your state, as well as nationally, when you have an opportunity to go to it. So next slide, please. ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Policy, was created as a sub-cabinet level agency in 2001. Our charge is to develop and promote policy and to coordinate with employers at all levels across the federal government and the state government in order to increase employment, competitive integrated employment in particular, for youth and adults with disabilities. We are, particularly right now under the new administration, increasing the focus that we have on stay at work and return to work for individuals with barriers to employment, including individuals with multiple barriers to employment, and certainly including veterans with disabilities. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on customized employment. When ODEP was first started as a new agency here at Labor, one of the things that we wanted to make sure we were supporting, and a strong statement that would be coming out of our office, was that people can work. We believe all people can work. We believe people with multiple barriers can work. We believe people with the most significant impact of disability in their life can work under the right circumstances, not in a kind of patronizing way, but in a way that is very contributory to the employer and to the workplace. We wanted to be able to document and prove that, in particular around the public workforce system. The workforce system, as you know, here at Labor, is really like the hub of getting to employment outcomes. And the DevOps and the levers and the various veterans-related activities that happen through the American Job Centers are obviously a critical part of that. But all of the other services and programs of the workforce centers, the one-stops as they were called at the time, we wanted to go in and be able to impact their capacity to be able to serve people with disabilities in, to use ADA words, in a meaningful and effective way. And we also wanted to do it in a way that was universal. We have such accolades for supported employment. In fact, customized employment, as we'll talk about in just a minute, stands on the shoulders of supported employment. We wanted a strategy that was going to be universal enough that the workforce system would look at it and say, gosh, this is relevant for multiple of our customer bases. The people who come to a workforce center, to an American Job Center frequently are in fact people with barriers to employment. And whether those barriers might be English language proficiency, maybe they have transportation or childcare issues, maybe their parents are aging and they've got some family issues around care for their parents. Maybe they are aging themselves and getting ready to retire, or maybe they have disabilities, including veterans with disabilities. And we wanted to have an approach that was so universal that it could apply to all of those people. And through dialogue with national leaders, and leaders here at Department of Labor as well, of course. Please excuse my throat, by the way. I don't know what happened to it. This morning I actually feel fine. I just can't talk very well. Anyway, we came up with this notion of customized employment. And over the course of 5 years, ODEP implemented 3 different grant initiatives targeted to customized employment and different populations. And we also implemented 2 national technical assistance initiatives. One technical assistance initiative for American Job Centers and all the grantees. A second technical assistance initiative targeted to service providers in the community who were charged with partnering with American Job Centers in order to serve people with disabilities or other significant barriers to employment. So our grant initiatives, we started out with the second bullet here, customized employment. We actually did 3 different 5-year each cohorts of customized employment grants to different American Job Centers across the nation. They each had 5 years working with the TA Center and national subject matter experts to build capacity to serve job seekers through customized employment and to align their policy in support of providing customized, because it requires collaboration and partnership and leveraging across multiple service systems. The second cohort of grants was for people who were chronically homeless. This obviously has significant relevance for you guys doing the HVRP grant, but we wanted to prove that people who were chronically homeless, and the federal definition, by the way, of chronically homeless by default presumes disability. We wanted to prove that these folks could work in competitive integrated employment. And the last cohort we called the Workforce Action Grants. This was right after the Supreme Court decision in the Olmstead case, calling for swift a movement to the community of people who had been in psychiatric facilities, nursing homes, and other residential placements, moving them to community, including to employment. And the president at the time had issued an executive order for swift implementation of the Olmstead decision. And so Labor was working with HHS and Medicare, Medicaid, and HUD, and other agencies to try to do a coordinated initiative around getting people out of segregation into the community. But each one of these cohorts of grants had the same requirement. Partner with the American Job Centers, one-stop career centers at the time. Implement using strategies and support of national subject matter experts provided through the technical assistance. Implement the process of partnership and leveraging that can result in a customized employment placement for the individual job seeker. And then, of course, align the policy accordingly. The goal, again, to prove that these strategies work, regardless of the type of disability, the strategy is universal. Next slide, please. Over the 5-year period, we had very dramatic results across all the cohorts of grants. And so what we did is we pulled some of the findings. These are old, these are from 2006, but we're going to bring it to present day in just a minute. So for individuals, we were able to document, validate through the 3 different grant cohorts. Customized employment produces high quality employment with increased wages, benefits, and level of integration into the community for people with disabilities who are previously considered unemployable by some systems. These are people who had been considered non-feasible for employment, often by voc rehab. They had failed sheltered workshop, I say that in quotes, but essentially they were not even thought to be feasible for sheltered workshop placement. They were largely in day activity programs and spending a lot of time visiting the mall. Customized employment can reduce reliance on public benefits. We found that as people began their actual employment in real jobs where they were contributing and earning wages, that in many instances they began to move off of benefits. These were small numbers, but they were very positive in their impact. And the third bullet, use of customized employment strategies can result in employment or reemployment for other groups of people considered hardest to serve by the workforce system. And I kind of covered that already. This is not just for people with disabilities. This is for people who, for whatever reason, the traditional job process, the traditional employment process is just not working for them. So let's try this process, see if we can make a good match between the individual and the needs of the employer, because it's an equal equation. It's not just let's find the person a job, let's find out what the employer needs. Let's match those needs with the specific skills of an individual. And it's the goodness of fit that makes it a win-win situation for both the employer and the individual. So findings for systems, please, next slide, please. For systems, the integrated customized employment model increases efficiency through new partnerships and funding sources. By developing partnerships and leveraging those partnerships, there was a sharing of the costs associated with achieving a customized employment outcome. So that if you imagine a circle and the individual with a disability is in the middle of the circle, and around the individual with a disability is the workforce system, the VR system, the education system, the TANF system, the Medicaid system, the mental health system, the IDD system, whichever systems were appropriate for the individual job seeker were the systems that were around the table. And one system could say, well, gosh, okay, I'll do the transportation. Somebody else could say, well, we can provide the technology. Somebody else will say, well, we can do the job development. Somebody else can, each of the pieces was owned by the team, so that the responsibility for the whole thing was not solely the responsibility of one system. Second bullet, use of universal strategies and employment systems can change the way these systems are organized and operated, both for customers with disabilities as well as others with barriers to employment. This produces more effective services and outcome. What we found in the job centers and in the other systems that were partnering with the job centers to implement the grants was that they began to do things differently. They had partnerships developing that had not existed before. They One of the grantees was a TANF agency that was participating, and they were sufficiently impressed or intrigued with what they were seeing with the labor dollars that they ended up starting their own separate pilot using state TANF dollars to achieve customized employment outcomes for TANF participants. They stopped that pilot partway through because the findings were already statistically significant in support of the customized process. And the final bullet, leadership personnel are critical change agents for increasing employment for people with disabilities. I think we all know this. The research literature is very strong. The power of the leader in helping drive system change is essential. So to the extent that you can make sure your leaders are educated about systems change strategies, such as customized employment, and certainly such as support employment as well, the greater probability you're going to have that these processes and these changes will actually be embedded in the system. Next slide, please. Findings for employers. Use of customized employment strategies can assist employers in retaining valuable staff. Why retaining? Because it's not just about getting the job the first time. Sometimes people will sustain an injury while they are working. And through the process of customizing, an employer can retain that staff rather than that staff having to leave the job and go on workers' comp or some other job entirely, which saves, as you guys know, it certainly saves employers time, energy, and effort. And the second bullet, use of customized employment strategies can assist employers to address specific conditions within their business that require attention. And by that, the process of customization is that our job developers go and they make a visit to an employer. And it's not that they are making a visit, knocking on the door saying, would you please hire this person over here? They are going to the employer to find out, what does this employer need? And very frequently what we found happening was that there were unmet needs in the business that could be addressed through a customized position. All employers have unmet needs. And if you can package their needs in a way that is a good fit with someone who happens to be a job seeker who has heretofore not been successful securing employment, then you've got a win-win situation. And so that was a finding for employers. So we really, as I said, these were all findings from 2006. But since then, we've continued to work. I apologize for my voice so much, on advancing customized employment. We worked through national technical assistance and through some other projects to keep it going, to keep it growing. The field was latching on to it. Organizations like APSI and TASH, which are very well-known organizations in the disability field and national in scope, began to embrace it and promote it. And we were very thrilled when working internally with the administration in the early part of the reauthorization of WIOA, that the recommendation went forward to the Hill to include customized employment in the WIOA reauthorization. And in fact, it is in the final legislation. It's in Title IV, but we've also got some materials and some other technical assistance products that have been developed specifically for Title I, for the American Job Centers. And so we're very thrilled that it is actually legal now in the law. It just kind of gives it a power that people out in the field, whether they are the system, whether they are a provider, whether they are a job seeker, that they can ask for it, knowing that it is there in the law. Later on in the slide, you have, or in the slide deck, you actually have the definition of customized employment as it exists within WIOA. Next slide, please. So an essential part of achieving a customized outcome, as I mentioned, is discovery. Just as an attorney does discovery in a legal case, when you do discovery with an individual, you are learning about that individual at a level of depth that it helps you work with the individual and leads you to the kind of job tasks that for which this individual would be successful. Sometimes the individual might need support, as in supported employment. But oftentimes, if the discovery is done in a way, it can lead you to a job where the individual might not even need ongoing support. So it's the first step in a customized employment outcome. As indicated, it is a universal strategy. For example, our National TA Center, the LEAD Center at the National Disability Institute, has just released a guided group discovery manual. It's a group training that can be implemented through a community provider, through an American Job Center, through a university training program, to help lead people through the discovery process in a small group setting. Some people will require individualized, facilitated discovery, but for many people, the group process will help them learn more about themselves and the kind of job that they might be successful in achieving. In fact, our lead technical assistance center piloted the discovery manual, the guided group discovery manual in the job centers, and we have some great findings and information about that. If you go to leadcenter.org, you can find that information. Next slide, please. So discovery is useful, as I said, at the beginning of customized employment. You learn about the skills, the contributions that the person could make, the conditions of their employment, what really has to be in place or needs to be in place for that person to be successful, what supports are needed in order for that person to be successful, and what partners are essential to help make those supports real for the person. And that could be the VA, it could be the Job Center, it could be VRDD, Centers for Independent Living, a particular provider that specializes in something. So that's all identified during the discovery process. And you end up, after discovery, with a blueprint for employment that guides the plan and job development process. And as previously mentioned, it promotes the blending and braiding and leveraging of resources across multiple systems to be able to get this outcome for the individual, and it leads to successful employment. Next slide, please. So actually, let's skip over this one. I'll come back to it in a minute. Go to the next one. So, and skip over this one because this is in the WIOA, and I don't want to take up the time now because you can look that up or look on your PowerPoint presentation afterwards. An essential difference with customized employment is the discovery process. It circumvents a comparative approach. Most assessments, you as an individual are being compared to other people. How did someone else do and how do you measure up? With the discovery process, you're only being compared with yourself. So it circumvents that process in a traditional job development approach that is comparative and which has historically, unfortunately, excluded many people with disabilities from competitive integrated employment. And you see on the right side of the slide some of the different things that you end up with, the processes you go through, informational interviews, matching skills, actually developing a proposal to take to an employer once you've figured out a good match. Next slide, please. So who benefits? It's not just for people with disabilities, as we indicated already. It's for a wide range of job seekers. As a matter of fact, the Harvard Business Press a couple of years ago put out a book called Workforce of One. This is an HR book. It's designed for HR managers. It's all about customized employment. Now, we've never talked to these people. They've never talked to us. But what they were saying in this book to HR managers is that customization, as they call it, is the way of the future. This is the way for employers to get the best out of their workers in the future, is to look for that goodness of fit, that good match of job tasks and employer needs. So it's really exciting. We're thrilled it's in the law. We're thrilled to be partnering with vets to try to make it real. We have nothing but the utmost of respect for supported employment, especially the IPS model and everything that it stands for. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rose Sloan, our policy advisor here at ODEP, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Employment First, and in particular, how you can find out what's going on in your state through a web portal.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. This is Rose speaking. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I'm going to take you through just the outline of what is available to you at employmentfirst.leadcenter.org. This is the homepage of this very impressive database and just, portal of information that you can access about not only national statistics, but also state statistics. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the right-hand side, we have national statistics that you can take a look at. We have a map. You can pick any state you'd like to learn more about. And I also want to bring your attention to the bottom, which is where the featured resources are. I definitely encourage you to take a look at those because they're very helpful. Next slide. So if you see on the top, we have the home, we have the national data, state profiles, etc. I'm going to just walk you through those tabs. National data is even more data than we had on the home page. As you can see, for 3 different years, all able to compare side by side. Next slide, please. Not only do we have the general data, but we also have it broken down by different systems. So we have Bureau of Labor Statistics data, we have Social Security Administration data, we have mental health. Next slide. Here's just another sample of all the data we have at the national level, and this is only a sample. When you go to the website, you can see even more, including education, wage and hour division statistics, a whole plethora of stats. Next slide. So now let's say we actually clicked on a state. In this particular instance, we clicked on the state of Iowa. You will see that there is another menu in which you can click on all these different tabs. For now, we are just at a snapshot. So on the right side, similar to the national data, we will see similar statistics, but just for the state of Iowa. In addition, we have a box for every state called the State VR Rates and Services. These VR rates and services vary from state to state, so this is very helpful and one of the newer resources on this website that we hope you'll find helpful. If we move on to the next tab, so the next slide, we are at the state data. Might look kind of familiar. It's still based off of the same statistics that we showed at national, but again at the state level. And as you probably are not too surprised to see, next slide, we also have it broken down into the various state systems as well. This database is updated quarterly, but the various resources in which the statistics are drawn from are updated at various times throughout the year. So you'll see that the years from page to page may differ, but we always have the last 3 years of data available on every page. Next slide. So if we move on the state menu, we are now on the legislation tab. All the following menu items all are very similar in that all of the items under each tab is in chronological order. So the newest pieces of legislation in this case are first. And yes, that is not a typo. That is a piece of legislation that was passed just last month. So this website is really, really current and will hopefully be a good resource to you. As another example, next slide, we have the partnerships tab as an example for Iowa. Again, there was a partnership developed just last month. Moving on to the next slide, we have the state comparisons tool. And this is really neat because you can take up to 3 states and compare their statistics in any of the areas that might be of interest to you. This is just a sample. Next slide. We also have the advanced search option where you can look at very specific information. So let's say you're interested in executive orders, you can check that box. Let's say you're interested in the VR system, you can check that box, and then all the results will be executive orders that have to do with the VR system. Just for an example, there are probably millions of different combinations you could choose to find exactly what you're looking for. And then this next slide is just an example. We checked the executive order box, and on the left side, you can see the numbers on executive orders in the various areas. Finally, my last slide, please. These are just links that we think will be very helpful to you. Again, just the way to access the Employment First web portal, as we call it, is the first link. And the second link is our way of registering for our community of practice, which is a very useful listserv to join. You will have access to monthly webinars on various topics. The one coming up in September is on employer engagement. And you'll also be on the listserv that gives you just basic federal updates when anything super major happens, or if there's funding opportunities that we're aware of, we'll post those on the listserv as well. Thank you so much for your time, and I will pass it on to Sarah.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to just augment one thing. Thank you so much, Rose. This is Chris again. I'm trying to think about how might this web portal be useful to you guys. I'm trying to put myself into your position. And you're let's say you're in the state of Iowa, or you're in Arkansas, or you're in Washington State, whatever. As Rose indicated, there are over 90 data points of national data and their comparable number within each state, so that you can look at your state and see about unemployment, see about the number of Ability One contracts. You can see all this data specific to your state. One of the tabs you can click, you can find out what discretionary grants are in your state. Maybe it's a disability employment grant. Maybe it's a promise grant. The promise grants are youth transition grants that are funded by education, VR, labor, HHS, golly, a bunch of, I think there are like 6 agencies funding the promise grants. Maybe there are other discretionary grants. You can find that information so that you can see what other things are happening in your state that maybe you would want to consider linking with or finding out more about. They're updated, as Rose said, quarterly, so it's always very current. Maybe you know that your state could really benefit from legislation or regulatory change or an executive order. You can go in and do that comparison activity that Rose showed you, and you can look specifically for executive orders that have to do with mental health, that have to do with the mental health system, or VR, or give me some other words that might be in there. Medicaid, right. And it'll pull out examples for you from other states so that you can, examples can really help you kind of create what's going to work for your state. And when you have examples of what other states have successfully done, then it can help you put your own options together, whether it's an EO, whether it's a regulatory change, whether it's a piece of legislation. It's all there. It's just it's a portal that's just rich with information. We're in the process of changing the name because it goes well beyond just quote unquote employment first. It's so broad and so deep in terms of what is housed there. So with that, Cindy, we're going to turn it back to you. We could do a whole webinar just on that web portal, by the way, if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Chris and Rose. And Chris, thank you for, I know it's tough when your voice is, when you're having trouble with your voice. We really appreciate it. If you guys don't mind hanging out for a few minutes, we'll get to questions. But in the meantime, it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Swanson. She's an IPS supported employment trainer for the IPS Supported Employment Center at the Rockville Institute in Westat. And she has experience as an employment specialist, an IPS supervisor, and a state IPS trainer. So she's got a lot of great information and experience to share with us. So Sarah, take it away.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about IPS supported employment, and that's a specific type of supported employment. IPS stands for individual placement and support. And whenever you see IPS in front of supported employment, that means that it's the evidence-based practice. So if we can go to the next slide. Today, so when you hear a lot of people talk about evidence-based practices and best practices, you may wonder what that means. And what it should mean is that for something to be considered an evidence-based practice, there should have been multiple research trials that point generally in the same direction, meaning that the practice has been effective, more effective than the controls, and also that the research has been done by different researchers and ideally done in different places. And for IPS, there have been 23 randomized controlled trials, and all 23 trials show that IPS was more effective than the control group. And that's really astounding because, you know, with most medical research, there are some trials will show that an intervention is effective, and some will show that it may not be effective. And what the medical community goes with is if something shows that it's effective more times than not, then that could be a preferred treatment. But in IPS, all of the research trials have shown that it's more effective than the control group. In the US, IPS is almost, people in IPS programs are almost 3 times more likely to obtain jobs than people who are in the control groups. And the control groups are whatever employment services are available locally that people think are the best services. And so that encompasses a wide range of different types of employment programs. And let's see, IPS is effective in rural environments. In fact, so often in very rural environments. We work with 22 states and 3 European countries, and we've seen IPS work just as well in rural and frontier areas as in big cities. It also works well with people of different ages and different races and ethnicities. So that's just a little bit on the background of, and I should also say that IPS originally was researched for people with serious mental illnesses, but in recent years, people have been expanding the research to see if IPS could help people with other types of disabilities. And so far, it is looking as though IPS has been able to help people with other disabilities, and those would include spinal cord injuries, autism spectrum disorders, more common or less serious mental illnesses, such as post-traumatic stress disorders. It's been the people in the VA have been trying IPS for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, and they've had really good results. And so I think, and traumatic brain injuries. So I think that we're seeing that IPS is branching out a little bit and helping people with different disabilities who'd like to work. Could somebody move it to the next slide, please? Thanks. So I'm not going to go into great detail talking about IPS today, but I just want to give you a little overview of what the IPS approach is like. IPS uses a strengths-based approach. And by that, we mean that, all of us succeed in our jobs because we found careers that reflected what we're good at doing and minimized what we're not so good at doing. And in IPS, we like to use the same approach by helping job seekers think about what they enjoy, what is their best time of day, do they like to be around people or not, what kind of working environments are good for them. We help them think about their work history, what they liked and what they didn't like. And with some people, we might even do some career exploration if they aren't sure what they'd like to do. So taking them to different workplaces to talk to people working in different fields, or talk to managers about, what type of people are successful in their businesses and what people need to do to qualify for different jobs. But we're focusing on the person's strengths. And that doesn't mean that we're ignoring symptoms or other issues. But we know that in order to help people succeed, you've got to focus on their strengths, and that's what helps employment specialists also feel hopeful that they're going to be able to help somebody find a job they like and keep it. And that's what helps job seekers stay hopeful as well. IPS also uses a team approach. And so we want to include anybody who's important to the job seeker or student or worker, depending on what phase they're in. So in some cases, that could be family members or close friends who can help provide some employment supports. It could be the state vocational rehabilitation counselor. It could be treatment professionals. For example, if somebody's getting mental health treatment, we hope that the mental health treatment team meets on a regular basis and that the employment specialist is part of that, so that everybody is coordinating their services. And IPS is a community-based service. So employment specialists spend a lot of time out of the office. They may see some people in the office, and they go to the office for meetings or to do paperwork, return emails, but they also are out in town with the people they're serving. So they might be, on any given day, they might be taking somebody to follow up on a job application. They may be going to a workplace to visit a newly employed person and have a short meeting with the working person and his employer just to talk about how the job is going. Or if an employee doesn't want his boss to know that he's part of an IPS program, the IPS specialist might meet the person during his lunch break at a fast food restaurant, or maybe would meet the person at his home after work. It could be that the employment specialist is at the library helping somebody with an online application. So, they're out and about in the community, which I think that's really nice with IPS because, we're talking about helping people get jobs so that they can be part of their community. And so we want to be out there with them, helping them explore what's there and learning about different types of businesses along with job seekers. Or I should also add that, another activity that an IPS specialist might do during the course of a day is take someone to the local community college to meet with a financial advisor or to talk to, it escapes me now, a program advisor about different types of educational programs. Because some people do want to get some training or certification so that they can get a job that pays a decent living wage. And the last thing I would say is that IPS uses a very individualized approach. So not everybody follows the same timeline for going back to work. Most people are helped to look for a job relatively quickly after they enter the program, but some people might want to explore training programs. Other people might want to take their time just because they've been out of work for a while and they need a little time to gear up and think about going back to work. Some people want their family members involved, others don't, and on and on. But I think what's most important is that the services are individualized, so that people feel like the service, they have control over their lives and that the services are comfortable for them. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks. So one way to describe IPS is to talk about the 8 practice principles. And I'll just review those for you quickly here. The first is 0 exclusion criteria, and that means that anyone who's interested in going back to work is eligible for IPS services. It doesn't matter if the person is still having psychiatric symptoms. It doesn't matter if the person is homeless or is missing appointments with other treatment providers. The only criteria for entering IPS services is that the person says he wants to work. And the reason for that is that in the research studies, what we found is that the desire to work help people overcome many other barriers to employment. And I certainly true in my years of working in programs. And so I remember one man who had a serious drinking problem, and he would drink every night basically until he passed out. And he also had psychosis. He felt he had symptoms of paranoia. He felt very uncomfortable around other people and had lots of anxiety. And I was just starting out in the field, and my supervisor said, you know, you got to help Tom find a part-time job. And I helped him find a job, but he had to take a bus to work, and he was so nervous. By the time he got to work, he could not get off the bus, and he would just ride it back home again. And so my supervisor said, you know, you have to help him find another job, but it needs to be within walking distance of his house, and you know, it shouldn't be in the evening. But it also can't be in the early morning because he's kind of hungover in the early morning. So we want it to be in the late afternoon, early evening. That's when he's at his best. And so I helped him find another job. But at this job, there were a bunch of pretty young women, and I think they totally flustered Tom every time he was around them, and his anxiety just went way up, and that job didn't work out either. And so all the criteria kept piling on, but then, you know, finally I was able to help him find a job cleaning banks in the early evening hours. That was his best time of day. It was close enough to home that he could walk there. It just so happened that there weren't pretty young women around him. He wasn't around the public, which was also important for him because he was uncomfortable being around groups of people. And he worked at that job for years. And it just always stayed with me throughout my career because it was an example of how you might think when you first learned about Tom that he wasn't ready for work because he had this drinking problem or his symptoms weren't under control. Or after you watched him in the job or two, you might think he's not ready for work. But, you know, Tom didn't really change that much during the time that I knew him. What really changed was I learned more about what worked for Tom and was able to eventually help him find the right job. The second principle is integration of mental health and IPS services. So ideally, the mental health treatment team or whoever the treatment team is, it could be a housing team if it's transition age youth, or it could be a medical team if it's another type of disability. But the treatment team and the IPS specialists, we hope, sit down once a week and have a meeting. And the meeting might discuss some people who are on the IPS caseload, and it might also discuss some people, they might also review some people who are not on the caseload. But it's kind of a brainstorming session. It should be positive. It's to help think about how to help people achieve their goals. And we want everybody thinking together about how to help people with work. So I can think of a team meeting I was at recently in Wisconsin where, you know, they were trying to help the team think about a job for someone who had some serious grooming problems. And, you know, he just did not seem interested in changing his grooming habits. And it was the mental health practitioner who said, well, what about a job delivering auto parts from one auto store to another? Because he'll be in his own car. It won't matter if his grooming is not so good and he likes to drive. And I thought that was just a perfect example of how integrated services work well. The third principle is there's a focus on competitive jobs. So that means that we want to help people find regular jobs in the community where they're making the same wages as their coworkers who may or may not have disabilities, but they're just jobs anybody can apply for. The fourth is that there's personalized benefits planning. So people have an opportunity to learn before they go back to work how their benefits be affected by earned income. And they should get individualized information that would let them know, you know, if you worked part-time, making X number of dollars, this is what your bottom line would look like. If you worked more hours, this is what your bottom line would look like. And as people are offered changes in working schedules, promotions, pay increases, they may need to meet with the benefits planner again. The fifth principle is attention to work preferences. The story I told about Tom gives you some idea about preferences, but preferences are also obviously about the type of work the person might want to do, how close to home. You know, some people will say, I'll take 2 buses to work, but I won't take any more than 2 buses, or, you know, I won't take more than 1 train ride. So you need to talk to people about things like that. Time of day might be a preference, especially if someone has young kids. And the sixth principle, and you know, the employment specialist is not expected to be, you know, doesn't have any magic up their sleeve, but they try to help person look for the job that suits his preferences best. And if they can't find exactly that right job, then they back off and they look for the next best job. One of my favorite examples was of a guy who had a substance use problem, and he drank alcohol regularly in the evening, but he wanted to go back to work. And so he told an employment specialist if she could get him a job on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he'd go back to work, because then he thought he could drink on the other nights and still be, he could drink every other night, but he wouldn't drink the night before work because he wanted to be in good shape when he went to work. And so she, bless her heart, just said okay, and went out there job hunting with him. And he did not find that Monday, Wednesday, Friday job, but he ran into an employer who wanted to hire him to work Tuesday through Friday. And he was so excited about being offered a real job that he took it. And he felt so good about working that he refrained from drinking on the nights before work, which meant that he was drinking a lot less than he had been in the past. And after he worked for about 6 months, and he could tell he felt better when he didn't drink as much. And so he tried cutting back his alcohol consumption even a little bit more. And so the job really did contribute to his recovery. The sixth principle is rapid job search. And so for that principle, we say that for most people, the employment specialist will meet the person, spend a few weeks talking about their work history, their family, their supports, what type of work they think they'd like to do, their education history. And then generally within about 30 days, either the employment specialist, the job seeker, or both of them together have in-person contact with an employer about a job. And that's been a really important one. What we see is that if it takes too long to actually get out there and start meeting employers, job seekers start feeling like, oh, this is never going to work, no one's going to hire me, and they drop out of the program. So the seventh principle is a systematic job development, which means that employment specialists visit employers, and we have a real structure to how they do this, where they visit multiple times to introduce themselves, learn about the different jobs in the businesses, try to understand what's important to each manager, and start building a relationship before they discuss a job seeker. So not so much looking for job openings, but more building relationships with employers. And then the last is that there's time unlimited and individualized support for working people. And on average, most people stay in IPS for about a year. And in the beginning of a new job, working people get job supports for about a year. Some people much less, some people could be more. So it's just individualized to the person and what they might need. So if I could move to the next slide. Okay, so Cindy asked me to tell you about this online practitioner course that we have. It's a web-based course for employment specialists and supervisors, and it has 8 units. People taking the course have a few weeks to work on each unit, and each unit consists of reading material, taking little quizzes, and watching videos. And then at the end of the unit, there is an assignment, and that's because the units aren't really what is IPS about. The units really focus on what are the skills an employment specialist needs. So for example, the units on job development would mean that employment specialists would read a little bit about how to approach employers using this very structured format, and they would watch videos of employment specialists meeting with employers, and then they would have an assignment to go out and try using the new techniques that they learned about. They would write about them and email their instructor about where they went, what happened, and the instructor would email back, different ideas and questions, and so they'd kind of have this email conversation about their assignment and how it went, because what we hope is that the course will teach people new skills. The next course starts in mid-September, and registration is open now through September 1st. Members of the general public can use the first link, and HVRP grantees only should use the email address that Cindy included for information about how they can register. So I guess that's all for now, Cindy. I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, Sarah. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and submit them. I did have one question, and I think maybe Sarah and Chris, that it's appropriate for both of you, and it's the idea of what would you say to someone who is wanting to start either using a customized employment model or an IPS supported employment model, but the pushback that they're getting is that certain individuals are not ready for employment because of their disability or mental illness or active substance use. What could they say to persuade the powers that be that employment is something that those folks might be ready for, regardless of what other barriers they might be facing?
Yeah, I think the powers that be need to hear from people who've gone back to work. So even when we work with a number of IPS programs in the United States, and even when the state people are trying to convince their legislators that they should get behind IPS, what they do is they ask working people to come with them down to the state house to talk about their jobs and why working is important to them. Because people are people, and the powers that be, whether that's in your agency or in your state or in your state government, they all respond to hearing and meeting from people who have gone back to work, who can talk about, you know, there was a time I was homeless, I didn't have any place to live, but working was so important to me. And I met this employment specialist who was really positive, and, you know, they just tell their story, and it's, you know, it's truly amazing. So even if you don't have an IPS program yet, if you or one of your colleagues knows somebody who's gone back to work in spite of having difficulties, that just always works better than me trying to convince somebody.
This is Chris. I really agree with Sarah. The power of positive examples is just very, very, very important. And when they can be provided in person, such as someone who's actually in the community who can come and make a point, or even if you have just examples or materials or pictures of individuals who have gone back to work. I tell you just one example. This is a very powerful example. I don't have this individual here in town, but it's a very powerful example. There's a woman in one of our projects who had lifelong struggles with pretty significant impact of disability, of schizophrenia in her life. She had issues with hallucinating. She had issues with medication management. No one thought she could work. She had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals all her life. And in the discovery process, the job developers learned that whenever she hallucinated, it was about boots. She was a very stylish person. She was also a very large person. She could never get boots that fit her. And in the process of them figuring out what kind of job would be a good match for her, she ended up getting matched to retail and boot sales for people with large calves. I mean, it was a very niche market, something you would never have thought about, or something you would not have seen posted on a job board somewhere. And she came and spoke to a DOL grantee conference. You honestly could have heard a pin drop in that room when she talked about her story and how no one ever thought she would be able to work. No one ever believed in her that she could have a job. And here she is now doing something that she loves. It takes a few examples of these powerful stories to make an employer or the powers that be try something different, a new way of thinking.
Thank you both. And Chris, what you just said was connected to another question that we got, which was, how do you convince an employer to take a chance on someone who might have some pretty significant disabilities and address the employer's trepidation that may be based in stereotypes, but is still a real trepidation for them on taking a chance on this type of employee?
Well, I think the example answer is, number one, continues to be important. I think when we show employers how employment has worked for individuals. Just generally, that is very important for us to do, but specifically, at least in terms of the customized process, the job developers are not going to an employer saying, see this person, we want you to hire them. The job developers are going to an employer looking for unmet needs. All employers have unmet needs. And in the process of relationship building with the employer and identification of unmet needs, and then making a proposal to the employer, by the way, we have someone who we think can meet your unmet needs. Would you like to try them? We have found employers very willing to do this. I still get pushback at the federal level of people saying, well, I can't imagine an employer is willing to do that. Yet we have case after case after case after case after case where they are. When you're not actively going in trying to sell a person and you're selling a skill, you're selling a need that they have and someone who can fill that need for them.
Thank you very much, Chris. Sarah, there's a couple of questions specifically about IPS. One of them is there any evidence of IPS sort of marrying with folks who are using the SOAR model for accessing SSI and SSDI benefits, of those two things sort of marrying together?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that's happened in a lot of our states, where there have been projects where they, in fact, it's happening right now, where they're working with SOAR and IPS together, and it makes a lot of sense to me that people want to get on benefits for some stability, but they also want a job.
Great, thank you. And another question we had is there a way for folks who might not be ready to take on implementing their own IPS model within their agency, but is there a way for them to see if there are other programs nearby that are implementing the IPS model that they might be able to connect to for specific clients and workers that they have in their programs?
Well, you could email me. We're working with 22 different states and regions, and so I can let you know if there's a program near you. Sure.
Yeah, this is Chris. This is Chris. Supported employment, not specifically IPS, much broader than IPS, and we understand and support IPS is the goal if you're looking at supported employment. But the voc rehab system can provide supported employment. It's not always IPS, but that might be a potential resource for you as well.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm looking at our time, and we are a couple minutes over. So I'm going to stop here. If there's any other questions that folks have, I'll continue to leave the webinar open so you can submit them, and we'll pass those on to our speakers. But I did want to take a minute to just thank Dr. Chris Button, Rose Sloan, and Sarah Swanson for sharing their expertise today. I think it's given folks a lot of things to think about, and hopefully open some minds about the possibilities of employment for folks who maybe traditionally weren't seen as employable. Thank you all for sharing your time today. We really do appreciate it. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available within 24 hours to see again, and we will also have a copy of the PowerPoint slides as well. The contact information for Chris and Rose and Sarah is on your screen, and I'll leave that up for a couple minutes. Thank you all very much. We very much appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.